All right, everyone, welcome to the 7th Annual Develop Denver Conference. You are in the home stretch, day 2, 3 o'clock. Thank you so much. We had multiple options for right now, and you chose our panel, so thank you for being here, and thank you for being with us. I am your host today. My name is Allison Daly. I am the founder and CEO of Recruiting Innovation. We are an online recruiter training platform. We've launched the world's first tech recruiter certification, teaching recruiters about software engineering and who these engineers are and how to engage with them in real language. I am honored to have this amazing panelist group with us. So I didn't start off the word, but our panel today is badass and actionable hiring practices. And we have some amazing experts with us to share some wisdom, some war stripes, and some perhaps some amusing stories as well along the way. To my left, we have Kate Catlin. Kate is the co-founder and CEO of Find My Flock. I'm wearing her swag today. Yay! They're an alternative job search service that vets companies on their platform for inclusivity, so you can interview with confidence that this is a great place to work. And they also give a great value to the companies they work with, that they focus on underrepresented people in tech. To our left, we have Morgan Whaley. Yay, Morgan! Morgan's also part of the Develop Denver Planning Committee. She is a career designer turned career developer turned career unicorn. We have a unicorn in our presence. She's currently bringing magic to all the charter communications. She's also helping fight the good fight with helping recruiters learn how to hire better and helping teams collaborate like humans. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, there. Maybe it's a side thing. I'll talk to the side. Okay. It's a user error. Okay. All right. And then on our far left, we have Alex Robinson. She is the engineering manager at Cognizant Accelerator. Yay! Where she has the opportunity to work every day with a wonderful group of diverse, talented, and creative people to tackle hard problems using cool software. Alex started her career in mechanical engineering before transitioning into software development. She's gained valuable product development experience in both fields through serving in engineering, team lead, and management capacities. She's a touring alum and lives in Denver with her husband and daughter. Awesome. So welcome everybody today. So the theme today is obviously how to improve our hiring processes. And sometimes when it comes to improving things, we first need to sort of assess where we're at today so that we can measure the improvements. What I'd like to kick off with is kind of talking about standard recruiting processes and hiring processes that exist as kind of the norm, but that we are realizing is really actually not very helpful, especially when we think about wanting to have a team that's of diverse makeup. So what would you say are some of the key things that you're seeing or have seen or even have experienced as candidates coming from all the technical side that you feel that is a norm but not really that healthy in the long run for hiring for diverse candidates? You want to take a step?
Yeah, so is this a little better? Okay, awesome. I think, some of the traditional ways of interviewing candidates for developer roles include doing computer science-based problem solving. That's kind of in a higher pressure situation where you're forced to look at a problem that you've never seen and then kind of come up with a solution and talk your way through it. I think that's something that's very tailored to specific training as well as a specific demographic. And people from different backgrounds and different cultures don't necessarily have that same training, or it's not really taught as like a part of the culture. And so it can be difficult to actually be in that type of situation and perform well. And so I think that creates, a process that will allow for one demographic and type of person to really thrive and succeed. So I think that's something that is not very helpful, but very it's something that is very pervasive today in interviewing. So.
The thing I've observed in addition to the interviewing process is how companies actually source and find candidates, either through internal or external recruiting. And I have become hyper aware in the past 2 or 3 years, especially, of what type of language is most pervasive in a lot of job postings. I've worked for companies that actually were largely consumed as a product by a fairly diverse group of people, and primarily also by women, and primarily by housewives and parents. And yet our engineering team was less than 10% female, most people didn't have children, and the company kept saying, we just don't have any candidates applying for this role that are a fair representation of this group, and they blamed it on the pipeline problem. It was the first job where I'd ever heard the phrase pipeline problem. I tried to get them to understand how to retool their language. Part of it was actually a DVLP Denver talk. There was a gentleman who was a VP of engineering for Degreed.com who came and spoke about hiring for diversity and how they increased candidate resumes overall and then increased diversity as well in that by looking at what types of benefits they chose to highlight. And this was a company that was actually very friendly to parents, to people with different schedules. It was largely distributed, largely make your own hours, unlimited PTO. These are all things that most people would latch right onto, but no one knew that those benefits existed because all it was a bulleted list of the required skill sets, a lot of them not immediately applicable to the position and not always realistic, and then 6 to 8 weeks of up to 10 interviews demanding that candidate's time. So we saw a lot of negative repercussions from this approach, and I wasn't able to get buy-in from my managers at the time to reimagine what our hiring site could have looked like from there. They gave it a design facelift, but nothing about the content changed, and to the surprise of probably literally no one, the candidate pool also didn't change. At the end of the day, unfortunately, the company started to go belly up, and it wasn't due to lack of talent. It was poor leadership all the way from the very top going down. But that place really got me thinking about when it comes to diversity hiring and bringing in people of different lifestyles, living situations, family situations, genders, social constructs, that we really need to stop and reflect on how the company is selling itself to candidates very, very clearly.
Yeah, what they said. Also, I would add that thinking really clearly about your interview process is critical. I cannot tell you how many candidates drop out during an interview process. You've probably seen this yourself. If your interview process is like 18 steps long and like involves a background check and interviewing your mother to make sure, I don't know what, like I've seen some crazy things in interviews. So keep it as short as you possibly can and just operate, you know, under the assumption that like you can figure out in limited amounts of time if someone is a good developer or not. Sit down and pair program with them for an hour. That's almost all you need. So like shorten your process as much as possible, and this is the biggest problem I've seen. Do not change your process on people. We had a woman who was going through our process, and this company told us the process was one thing. 100% of the company was men. They were like, we're ready to change, we're 10 out of 10 men, it's a problem, we want to hire some women. So they started interviewing this woman. It took them years and years to finally get everything scheduled. She starts going through the process, and all of a sudden, after she has completed the process, they invent another step because they're just not sure. And meanwhile, several men on the team had told me they were hired on potential, even though they didn't know the stack. This woman was like, I've shown you my potential and you're still not hiring me? You want me to do more free work for you? It was like a week of free work they asked her for. So do not change your process. Think about it ahead of time, make it as short as possible, and then don't change it no matter who you're talking to.
That's a good follow-up question in terms of some specifics. So I know there's a little bit of back and forth about code homework, right? Building things. What are your thoughts on that? I know, at least at Cognizant, you guys, maybe one of you could talk about how you had an assignment and let them just sort of pick. So we understand we want to see them code. We want to see how they think and what they build. But can we talk about what's been successful within code and how you, actually a little bit of a background. So Cognizant went through a big hiring push, and actually I'll let one of you share this, but they did a big hiring push and they ended up hiring 50% women in a very short amount of time, like weeks, right? So let's talk through a little bit exactly what that was, and then how we can take what we have already and maybe modify it for improvements. But let's walk through that case study.
All right, I will talk about how we arrived at the decision-making process, and then you want to talk about the in the trenches part? Sweet, all right, we have a plan. So at Cognizant, I was a senior engineer, but I was also privy to a lot of discussions in our core leadership team, despite not having immediate direct reports. So I kind of got the best of both worlds. I got to make decisions, but I wasn't in charge of anyone's career path, so that was kind of cool. So what we did is we had a large amount of candidates to hire. I think we had to hire between 20 and 30 people in about 3 to 4 weeks. We had to go from interviews to offers. So part of this was that we had a large percentage of women in leadership, and I think that having diversity in general in leadership can help facilitate conversations. And it also helps gain interest. I am infinitely more interested in a company if there is at least one female in management, preferably who I can speak with candidly about their experience with the company. So we had a discussion that was we had a problem to solve. We couldn't expect ourselves to spend a day or more interviewing candidates on site with the number of candidates that we had to go through. And then we talked about how it's a friction point for the candidates themselves. It is a pain in the ass to have to take a vacation day or subversively call in sick to work and pray that you don't run into someone walking down the street in your nice clothing like, no, I totally have the flu, but my doctor really wanted to see this blazer, and they're right around the corner by this tech company that everybody loves. It's totally a coincidence. And then you throw a smoke bomb, and then you run like hell. So we wanted to shorten this process, and we arrived at the possibility that the old process was basically a phone screening followed by kind of an in-person, followed by an additional in-person, which was about, from what I recall correctly, about 2-3 hours of whiteboarding, 2 to 3 hours of pair programming, and then another hour or two of one-on-one discussions with management. It's a tremendous amount of time. We were in a very small building, about the size of this space up here. We only had 2 conference rooms, and that was it. Thankfully, it was summertime, so we did a lot of walking interviews just around the neighborhood. I got an awful lot of people back late because I like to talk and walk. So we crunched that interview time from 8+ hours of direct contact in the office down to about 1.5 to 2 hours of direct contact time in the office. So I think we were able to get a really different, better pool of candidates through that process. And I'll let Alex talk about what that was and what her experience was with it.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I was conducting a lot of the technical interviews during that time, and one of the things that really helped us in condensing that timeline, right, was actually giving out a code challenge. And so before we talked about, you know, we did the traditional kind of whiteboarding, and then we may do pair programming, and we may solve a problem, but we moved to a code challenge, which gave the applicants an opportunity to have the space and time to really showcase their abilities. And one of the things that we actually didn't do at the time that we do now, which I think is really important, is we removed the time constraint for completing the code challenge. And I think that's really something interesting to think about, is that not everybody has 8 solid hours or 24 solid hours to commit to, you know, completing a code challenge, right? Some people have kids, some people have, you know, other jobs, you know, and so it's really a privilege to be able to just take that time and do work so you can interview. But so I think that's something really cool that we do that kind of opens the gate for, you know, people to be a part of our process. And you know, just having the opportunity to speak with candidates about their code and really understand why they made certain technical decisions, understand, you know, how much they know about the specific framework and the language that they chose and why they chose that, I think is so much more revealing than just sitting down with them and solving a problem. Because you still get to have those same conversations of this was the problem and how did you solve it and how do you approach problem solving. But it just gives a lot more insight into their ability and also their communication skills, in how well they can communicate their ideas and how well they can listen to feedback and incorporate that. And I think it just gave us the results of that, right? We talked about hiring a large number of women, hiring you know, a team that actually meshed really well pretty fast, because everyone you know, I think had a good level of communication and collaboration skills, which we were able to assess through that process. And so doubling the size of the company, I think, can be really challenging, and you go through a really hard period of adjustment when you grow that quickly, and it was actually really smooth. And a lot of those people are, you know, thriving in our organization today as well. So.
Kate, I'm curious, because you talk to a lot of different clients and you see a bunch of different companies at once. What stands out for you? What makes you excited to introduce a candidate to a company? What is it that the company is doing or standing for that makes you feel like, yes, they're going to get it and they're going to be a great place to work?
Oh my gosh, there's about 100 things I could say here. Should I keep it specific to the hiring process?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So a couple of standout hiring practices that I would say. First of all, it's like 90 degrees up here, so if it looks like we're sweating, at least I am. Great, thanks. Yeah, that's what I thought. So there's a couple of companies that stand out here. One is Automatic. So Automatic has a really, really long hiring process. I will admit it is not great on that front. They would admit that as well. They're also one of the hardest tech companies to get into, and so they feel that it's justified. Their process, however, is that you jump into their actual code base and start coding on actual work, and they pay you for it. Like, they pay you money. So they're not asking you to do some dumb code challenge that is going to go up on your GitHub repo and then never be seen by anyone again. This is like actual work, and they're on Slack with you answering your questions as though you were actually teammates. And that to me is so standout. Like, they get to know you, you get to know them, you get to ask questions, you get to see the code base, you can judge for yourself if you're like, oh my god, spaghetti code, get me out of here. And that to me is really standout. Number two I'm going to call out is Democracy Works. They do a great job of this because it is so designed around diversity and inclusion. So this part's a little weird. It's going to sound weird, but just think about it for a sec. So before they talk to you, they'll like answer your questions about the company, you know, they'll answer whatever you have that's like, what benefits do you provide, et cetera, et cetera. But only one person knows who you are in the whole company. And then they say, okay, do a code challenge for us. It's only 2 hours. 2 hours, time limited. You send it back to them. They anonymize the whole thing. It's like in a zip file. There's no names attached. They can't possibly tell who you are or where you're from. They review them all anonymously in this way so that you can see like who is actually a good coder and who's not just benefiting from bias. They move you forward in the process if you pass that code challenge. And then, if they get to the end of it, like, you know, 30 people move forward in the process and like 5 of them get to the final interview, if they go to the final interview and there are no underrepresented people in the candidate base, they say, I'm so sorry, we have to start over. And they start again from the beginning and bring in more candidates because it's a check mark for them that they didn't do a good enough job of sourcing people who are underrepresented in the first place. So those are a couple of huge standout ones for me. There's a lot too that is just like the more simple it is, the better. So there's another company I think that it was just like 3 things. You do a phone call with the engineering manager to do like a quick gut check that you actually know what code is. You come in and you spend like an hour pair coding with someone, and then you have another conversation with like the CEO, and that was it. That's probably enough in a lot of cases, you know. And I've heard before a couple companies say if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. I have mixed feels about that. But the whole point is stop wasting people's time. Like, don't go on a 60-second date, right? Like, you decide very quickly if someone is going to benefit your organization, and then you support the heck out of them after you bring them in.
All right. So, we touched on this a little bit regarding the hiring process. What is it about maybe bringing the candidates in the first place? So sourcing, because we referenced the pipeline problem earlier, but you also see people that have amazing backgrounds that aren't getting considered. What tips can we offer, whether we as engineers are out networking or when we're collaborating with our hiring team to bring us candidates? What are some tips that we can say in terms of, have you contacted these organizations? Have you posted to these different places? Like, they're out there, but what are we not doing right to get them attracted to us and connecting to us?
So a common problem that I have witnessed, both as an individual contributor and as a member of leadership, is a decoupling of people and departments and department heads and business people actually not knowing what the fuck they want. Always know what you need before you start interviewing people. Talking about wasting people's time, I have spent up to 20 hours interviewing with a company who then decided that they actually didn't need a front-end engineer. They needed an API engineer in Groovy, and that is completely outside of my wheelhouse. And I was like, cool, thanks for deciding that after 5 interviews and my PTO and my time. Like, appreciate it, guys. I will never talk to them again. The recruiter quit the company, and part of it was because he was pissed off enough on my behalf. So don't cross me. I will take you down.
In addition,
Man, there we go. All right. In addition to this, I think it's important that instead of it being a pipeline problem, I think what it really is the filter that is used to get the supply from the pipeline into the viaduct that then gets funneled into your organization. Like I said, companies are not super great at writing job descriptions sometimes, conveying benefits, building a good structure, knowing what they need, this kind of stuff. And so whenever we have openings in my department, I work on a great team right now. I love my team, but I would never want to refer someone from the community or a personal friend unless I knew that I was, number one, like if I'm rubber stamping a person, I'm also rubber stamping the company and the team in which I work. And so I'm not going to put either set of that side of the fence through the rigmarole of interviewing and possibly hiring unless I know that the company and the team is very clear on what type of skill sets they need, that they're realistic, and that they're actually going to hire for this job, and they're going to do it before like Q3 of next year.
And that kind of goes back to some tactical things. So some really fundamental things that we're finding in the diversity space, and you touched on this a little bit before, is and this is true, I think, in general, and we also see it with the millennial generation that they want balance in their life, but they also want meaning. Be very clear about what your health benefits are. So look at your career page. Are you talking about your benefits? Are you including health care? Is there paternal leave? Is there maternal leave? Then there's also some element of what not only is what the role is, but like what's the career trajectory. People really want to know, especially these days when you all can literally go to any place. And if you know when you walk into a company, okay, in the next 12 to 18 months, I'm going to be at a mid-level place, but I'm going to get some more challenging projects, and I can expect a promotion or at least some kind of role shift in 18 months, and kind of really outlining the growth plan. Things that need to go away are sort of this sort of hotshot talking, like rock star, kick-ass, ninja, shit. No one believes in that anymore, and it just makes you feel like they expect me to be here all the time and not have a life, right? And so there's some element of just thinking through those elements. There's also, when it comes to job descriptions, there's two great resources for running your job descriptions through this website that will tell you if you have sort of warning language.
I think it's text.io.
Yes, it's text.io. And it'll like flag any sort of gendered terms that you might have or things that are sort of leaning toward that rock star-y conversation. And then there's a second one that I'm totally blanking on. It's a woman's name, and she Okay, I'll put it in Slack later when I resource it, but text.io, I know certain companies out there that run all their job descriptions through there. And something when you're thinking about the job descriptions, because that's part of the pipeline problem, right, is people just aren't even applying because they aren't seeing a good company culture on your website and their job description really seems aggressive. Start off your job description just talking about the company and what you're building and why you're building it, what you're building it for, and what the higher mission is. And then, as you're going through the job description itself, don't talk about years experience. We all know people with 7 years experience who did the first year 7 times, right? And we also know people who have 2 years experience that have basically fit 7 years into those 2 years. So another element is to really talk about, you have debugged X and Y in these code bases. You have built a services-based platform with this type of code base. And getting really specific about the actual deliverables of what you're expecting them to do, so that not only are they sort of self-identifying into the role, but you're also kind of getting them excited about what they're doing. Just having job descriptions that's like 3 years of Java and 2.5 years of API work and whatever, it's not as compelling as, really talking about the nitty-gritty of the job. Any ads on sort of the job description or career pages? Yes.
Yeah, to kind of build on that, I have run job descriptions from like... Okay, there we go. What? Jiggle the handle. Okay. The entire time? Okay, because that's tiring. I was just going to say, it's a shame. God. Shit just got real. So, I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, job descriptions. Some of the best ones that I've seen, I try to push companies into this whenever I speak to them, and I also brought this up, I think, with recruiting innovation with my recruiter training for front-end engineers. Not only the words like rockstar, ninja, etc., like these mythical beings, actually they're all real, but we don't work with them in tech. But the things that I like to see in addition to, or in alternative of like a bulleted list, are things like hunger, and you're going to solve problems, you're going to collaborate. Like, sell people on what the work is actually going to be, and not, I'm going to assume that most jobs aren't just like sitting and working in a vacuum 8 hours a day. I guess some of them are, but I'm not applying to those. And so, yeah, I think just to kind of add to that would be to look at what alternative language looks interesting, and I'll grab down good and bad examples of job descriptions all the time and try to use those as learning points for myself, whether I know the company or not.
Lots of good points made here all around. I would add only 2 things. One is, again, making sure that benefits are listed. I'm trying really hard not to plug my company here, but if you're looking for a job, you can search specifically by benefits, like maternity leave, trans-inclusive healthcare, work remote. You can search for that on our job board. So just filter it right up front. The second thing is culture descriptions. So the more in your ad you can work in things like, and on Wednesdays we eat waffles, whatever it is, the more human element you can give to your job ads, the more people will feel good and like they feel like they know what it's like to be on your team. So yeah, if you want to get an enterprise level on Find My Flag, we read that for you, but it's the more you can bring that in, the more you can help people know what it's like to be on your team.
And kind of, if we're going to make big changes and we're coming up from, depending on whether we're in the leadership ourselves or we're trying to influence leadership, what are some ways that we can go about saying, hey, I'm looking around and our process includes 4 dudes staring at someone trying to defend their code, and we're taking 6 interviews. I don't think that this is working. How do we get leadership buy-in? How do we make a case for making big changes? Because we know how much companies love changes. What's worked for you all, or what have you seen work well?
As leadership, even yourself.
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that's really worked is that on our leadership team, we are very collaborative in our approach to assessing and also changing processes. And so really all it takes is for one person, at like a weekly management meeting to say, hey, I've been looking into this, or I've been thinking about this, and I really think our process could improve. and then provide some tips, and then it opens up dialogue. And so I think it really just takes a willingness from, I think, leadership from the top down to be open to changing. And if you've got that, I think it's great. I don't necessarily know how to have suggestions if you don't have that. But I think that's definitely, just keeping the communication line open and collaborative. An example recently too is I looked at the description of our code challenge, and it was super dry. There was a lot of bold and exclamation marks, and it was just really not inviting and a little bit intimidating. And I thought, we need to make this more inviting. People need to feel excited and actually view this as hey, this is really an opportunity that is great, and just make it seem nicer. I think one of our core values, to be honest, is just being nice people. And so we need that all of our material and everything that someone sees coming into the company to really reflect that. So
I'm a big proponent of just asking questions constantly. I am always asking leadership or new hires. I'll say hey, how's your onboarding been? I'll walk up to people who've been with the company a week, a month, however long, and just be hey, how are you settling in? Right now, I work embedded on a design team of 120 people. We grew a lot last year, and every other week we have a design team stand up and leadership goes around, makes their announcements, and then we all eat bagels together. And I will be there scanning for the new people, and I'm aha, there they are. And then I intercept them at the bagel station, and I'll be how's it going? How's your week been? What do you think so far? Isn't this neat? And then I'll kind of gauge what their reactions are, how they're settling in. And every week, our VP of design, who reports directly to our executive VP of product, who reports directly to the company CEO of charter, has open office hours. And so I will go in, and I did this on Tuesday before I came here because I wanted to talk to him about this. And I'll just sit outside his office with my laptop for as long as it takes before I can get his time. And he's a really inviting person. He's also very busy. And I will sit there and just be hey, how's it going? So, who's been hired lately? How can we roll out the welcome wagon more? What can we do to engage people? And he's always willing to answer a lot of those questions. And diversity on our team at my current office looks really different than anywhere else I've ever worked, because we also have a large accessibility team. So we have blind individuals, we have deaf people, we have people who are both. We have people who have diminished physical abilities, either with their hands or their legs or both. And then we also have people who have been in the industry for 30 plus years, because cable TV is not new. And so our diversity metrics are really different. And I've started to ask my boss, what, or my VP rather, what do the diversity metrics look like? And he's I actually have no idea. And he admitted my perception from my ivory tower isn't the reality of the situation, so we should really pull metrics and look at this. I just talked to him about this on Tuesday, and I plan to follow up with him at his next office hours and be hey, did you pull that stuff? And see what he says, because he agrees that it's important also to take a step back and at least look at what's happened in the past year and not just go off a gut reaction of oh, well, maybe we did pretty good. But to actually look at it, look at those numbers, look at that data, and then also look at the retention rates and the happiness levels of those individuals. And I think those give you a lot more good information on how hiring practices are working versus just kind of taking casual observations and seeing who shows up to the meetings or to the happy hours or things like that.
Okay, and maybe last question here, and then we'll open it up to questions with the audience. And we just touched on this. It's also we also have a revolving door in tech, and there's a retention problem. And this is when the market's this hot, we have a lot of opportunity. But what are some things you touched on, really good onboarding practices? If people aren't feeling stoked and happy in 90 days, their likelihood of leaving is 70%. And so, what are some things that we can do as teammates or as team leads, as companies, that we can make sure that people feel welcome, that they feel onboarded, and that there's room for them really to stay and be happy?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that is really important to keep in mind is that you want to have a diverse, team, and you want to attract all types of different people. But diversity without an environment where everyone feels welcome and valued doesn't really work. You can get people in the door, but you're not necessarily going to keep them if they don't feel like it's an environment where they can thrive in. And so, I was talking about this with a colleague of mine too, and I think as coworkers and as leaders within the organization, one thing that you can do is you can make space for people to be themselves and to feel comfortable. I think a more specific example is in our organization, we do have a lot of parents with small children. And we also have a lot of really early morning meetings. So we'll start calls sometimes at 6, 7 a.m. Where, you'll be on a call and your spouse or your partner is trying to get the kids ready and they're screaming in the background and there's lots of noise going on. And just creating an environment where like, yep, we've all got kids, it's great, we hear the screaming, don't apologize, like, it's okay, this is cool. I think just being mindful of those things and kind of opening up the space for people to be themselves and for it to be accepted. So.
The one thing I'll bring up in addition to this, I agree with all of that, and especially with the onboarding. Every company I've left in less than a year always had like a horrific onboarding process. Some of them I was interviewing at other places within like 2-3 months. But in addition to that, I think there also needs to be some level, especially if a company is trying to hire for either a new department or trying to, make this change. Like if a company says, hey, listen, diversity is not something we're great at. We want to hire more folks from this. And so they change their process, they change their interviewing, and then all of a sudden it's like, cool, it's raining diverse candidates. They need to allow for like at least 6 months of letting that process solidify a little bit before going in and changing something else. Just like don't change the job interview on the candidate. Don't change your process because in 3 months you don't see a sea change yet. Let things kind of take hold a little bit if you've enacted changes. See what happens from that, because when we grew the accessibility team at Charter, we went from 2 people to 22 people in a year. And that is a rapid team growth, and getting like blind architects who understand code is a very small group of individuals, especially in Colorado, and especially who are willing to drive to the tech center. It's hard enough to find that part. They're not driving to the tech center, but they are in Ubers or light rails. I should be clear here. But when I've talked to the managers on that side, they have definitely said, we had to give that team an opportunity before they could even start to make an impact in the organization. They didn't just bring on people and go, cool, you're going to enact this major shift because we got to do this. Like, accessibility is a big deal because companies can get sued for shitloads of money over it, but to bring in an entirely new team with new leadership, and especially when these people are non-sighted and need someone to walk them to the bathrooms or find conference rooms because there isn't Braille on it. We were solving a very different, specific kind of problem, and we really needed to give that process enough time and for everyone to feel comfortable as a group, because we didn't have kind of the momentum of cohesion that we had at Cognizant. It took a little longer for everyone to start to feel comfortable and productive, but instead of going, well, it's been 3 months and things aren't working, so we're just going to lay off this entire team and outsource it to a consultancy, instead they dug in for the long haul, and everyone is like coming out on the other side of that, and now we've built up actually this shining example on the team of what implementing a team like this at large enterprise can look like, and now we're considered a success story in the industry for it.
All right. What questions from our audience do we have? Yes, please.
I've heard from job seekers that they consider it a red flag for a company to insist on 3 references. I don't personally see that as too much of a red flag, but I thought that was interesting. I didn't know if there were other people who thought that way or what your input was on that.
I guess in and of itself, I can see why it's justifiable. I have worked with dozens, I don't know how many, I've worked with dozens of companies on their interview process. Exactly one has asked me for references, and it was a company that the candidate left very soon after joining. So based on this data point of one, or dozens as it were, I now view it as a red flag. But again, low data point.
And I will say, also coming from recruiting as well, it's a box that companies check off, and it is a little bit antiquated because of course you're going to give information of someone that's going to like you. Although I will say we had a senior person who the boss that they gave was really pretty lukewarm, and we ended up not hiring that person because of the bad reference, because we already had a little bit of a question. I feel like references kind of just confirm what you already think you know. So yeah, I wouldn't call it a red flag because it's normal, but as a company I wouldn't think that it's that helpful.
So I have a different perspective on this that I picked up at Cognizant, which is that depending on certain cultural backgrounds that comprise an organization, references can actually be used as a way to try and combat applicant fraud. See, that's why I looked at you. So I'll tell a quick story. When I was in Bangalore, India for Cognizant last year, I was reading the Financial Times in my room and eating a croissant, and it was delicious. And there was an article in the paper about how job applicants in India, it's a gold rush right now for offshore development. Like a lot of companies do a large percentage of this. And so there are these companies in India that will fudge your resume for you, and then people say like, I've worked for Oracle, I've worked for Microsoft, and they look like this really impressive developer with this huge CV of qualifications. And then this particular service, you could pay them the equivalent of a couple $100s, and they had call centers in New York City and New Jersey, and you call them up to get a reference, and they'd be like, good morning, this is Oracle. Oh yeah, I can get you to their former boss, hang on a second. And they were running these rackets. Yeah, to help people fake their resumes, and then if you Google the address, it'd go to like a parking garage in Hoboken.
No, I just want to add that we actually did encounter someone with a fake resume when we were doing that big hiring push, and this woman came in, and I guess in other parts of our organization, because it's pretty large, they didn't do hiring events like this. And so people have been able to kind of sneak in with these fake resumes and fake references, and she got into the office and realized that there was a coding challenge, and in the middle of the coding challenge she kind of froze up and was like, I can't do this. It says I have all this experience on my resume, but I can't code, and ended up leaving, and so it's real. It's real.
I'm unsure how to phrase this, but I am interested in all your guys' thoughts. So, diversity is important to me from specifically my time at Galvanize with Chris last year. Now that's something that I will always question and be aware of. I'm also aware that people have jobs and mouths to feed, right? And so for some people, diversity cannot be as important as it should be. How do you start that conversation? How do you get people understanding this is a problem and there is a solution and it is for the best? How do you generate those resources and educate you guys
Great documentary, and the name is escaping me. I think it's called Code Switch, Code something. I'm not sure what it is. They start.
Is it debugging
debugging the gender gap. Yeah, it's called code : debugging the gender gap. They should have just called it debugging the gender gap. Okay. So in this opening of this movie, I'm going to try and remember this. I don't remember the actual numbers, but in general, this is what happened. There was like only dudes developing cars when they first made cars, and specifically airbags. Like men were developing airbags, so they designed it all around men's physiques, which usually, on average, are larger than women's physiques. It's just a physical difference. So people would get in car accidents, and the airbag would blow, and men would be cool, and then like women and children would die because they were too powerful, and it would just hit you, expecting you to be like, I don't know, more pounds than you are, and then you would die. So this was a big problem that just no one thought about because there was no non-dudes on the team. So people literally died because there was no diversity. So now you're all thinking like, yeah, but I'm a web developer. Like, what? Like, I'm not gonna kill anyone. The problem is that this is an industry-wide thing, right? So right now we are using AI to transform literally everything. You can now use AI to call your hairdresser and get a hair appointment, or you can use AI to screen resumes, as Amazon recently found out. You can use AI for really anything you wanted to, but if there is only one segment of the population who is developing that AI, I suspect we are going to run into many, many, many more of these airbag problems. And eventually they might kill people. And so that is why diversity is important. And that's one where I'm sure you guys have other...
I can't top that. That's so good.
I have a more, I think a more modern example of the airbag thing. But there are, like, if you look it up on YouTube or on Twitter, for a while there was a video going viral of the motion detection. Like, I think it was in a bathroom. It was either like a soap dispenser or, but the technology, it couldn't pick up on darker skin tones. And so then, you know, I think this person was putting their hand there and nothing was happening, and then they took a white napkin and they put their hand there and it worked. So I think that's a really clear example of the, you know, results of developing technology and not having a diversified team. And the other thing I think can be really eye-opening and interesting as well. You know, when you think about diversity and you think about like really the heart of it's really a statement, I think, of valuing everyone. And I think there's some really, like, the first place to start when you think about, okay, why is this important, and how does this affect me, and, you know, why do I even bother about this, right? And it applies to everybody, is to think about implicit bias, too. Because I think we make snap judgments, we have, biases that are kind of ingrained in us that we've learned from, since we were little kids. And that really affects how you interact with the world, how you interact with other people, and it has an effect on, hiring, and it has an effect on, how we treat people in the workplace as well. And so they're really great tools. Like Harvard has one that's called Project Implicit, for you to do like a self-assessment of your own implicit bias and and identify areas where you have biases that you didn't even realize, and it's really powerful. So I encourage everybody to kind of explore that and do self-reflection on that first before you even start to assess your hiring practices or how to improve your workplace.
And that's a good kind of closing sentiment is, we're in an era where things are really changing and a lot of things are hard-coded into us, and that doesn't mean that we're bad people. It just means that we grew up in this society in this time that we did, and we truly have an opportunity to really look at self-reflect and also reflect upon our organization. And it's awkward, it's uncomfortable. I have to, I'm a woman, but I also have to take assessment of my whiteness and the privilege that means, and it's uncomfortable, but it's also very liberating. And I think that it's wonderful to see some changes, and it's wonderful to see all of you here. It means that this community cares, and it means that we all recognize that things are better when we're together. And the more that we can have diverse thoughts, the better we have diverse teams, and then the better our products are, and just in general, Life's more wonderful. And so I hope that you got some wonderful nuggets of wisdom and thoughts, and I hope you're able to take them back to your organizations and your teams. And on behalf of Develop Denver, thank you so much for being here, and we hope to see you at the closing party. Thank you.